Hello, beautiful souls. I'm your host, Angela Ahimsa, and you're tuned in to Feed Your Chakras, which is broadcasting live from Toronto and streaming worldwide on Just TV, Roku, YouTube, and Meta. Today's episode is all about breaking free. And I have a special guest, Brett Hawes, who's a clinical nutritionist and a functional medicine practitioner with over 20 years of experience of helping people reclaim their sovereignty. And he is a longtime health freedom advocate and the voice behind Beyond Health podcast, which once ranked 18 on Apple Podcasts, and his new show, Onward Podcasts. And through his work, Brett has explored some of the most pressing issues of our time, which I'm a big fan of: GMOs, vaccine risks awareness, and technocracy and nanotechnology, in addition to health politics and the bigger question of what it truly means to live free. He's also collaborated with international advocacy groups such as Children's Health Defense and the NHPPA and the Detox Project. And today his focus is on serving his local community in Ontario while continuing to be a beacon for truth and personal empowerment. So thank you so much, Brett, for joining us today. It's an honor to share this space with you.
Oh, thank you. And likewise, I am honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to seeing where our conversation takes us today. Unscripted, organic, let's go.
Wherever the wind blows. So let me just have a sip of water because I'm like scratchy. Okay, so let's just dive on in. Since we're going to be talking about breaking free, what does sovereignty truly mean to you, both personally and for the collective?
I mean, it's a loaded question because there's a few different angles to take when you look at the word sovereignty. I think like sovereignty as a concept is kind of in some ways being bastardized, in other ways misunderstood as well. And so, it's a few of the threads to pull on, and maybe we can unpack that and see where we land up. Is I've always been a firm believer in the right to choose, right? So informed consent, bodily autonomy, so long as you're not hurting anyone else, so long as you're not, you should be free to do what you want to do. But sovereignty in a broader context, and I guess today in a modern context, is a very different animal because we live in this world where on the surface, we have a lot of freedom, right? So I can still go to the store, I can go on vacation, I can go walk in the park, I can do all of these things. But when you peel back the veneer of that and you start to see how we actually live and operate in the world, that's where the whole picture changes, right? And so it's like, you start getting into things like, how do we exist in the system, right? So are we existing as free men and free women, or are we existing more as legal fictions and quote unquote corporate entities, right? From a financial perspective, like how do you unplug from the financial system and still operate in reality? Like that's very difficult, right? So on a more macro scale, if you look at politics, right? So sovereignty, like do we have sovereignty as a nation, right? Or are we, beholden to international organizations like the United Nations, World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and so on and so forth. So that's what I mean. Like the whole topic of sovereignty is really a behemoth of a topic, and it's I look at it in two different ways, which is the personal aspect of it all, and then you have to look at the more macro aspect of it all, which brings into play all of the things that I just mentioned.
Good answer. Yeah, it's kind of one of those buzzwords today that gets thrown around so much. So people don't actually really, I think, understand what it means. And to touch on your point, I don't think because we grow up in this society, I don't think people really realize how not sovereign we actually are.
Yeah. I mean, it's you don't know unless you know, right? And you don't know what you don't know either. Like that's I guess that's probably a better way of putting it. You don't know what you don't know. So I think there's a lot of things we take for granted, right? So, the whole idea of democracy as a concept, a lot of people still to this day believe that we genuinely live in a democracy, and if we just vote for the right person, everything, like things like that. And then I think it's also like from a more personal perspective, you're born into the world, you get issued a birth certificate, you get issued a passport, your health card, your driver's license. and that's just how it is, right? And you go to work and you pay your taxes and these types of things, and that's just how it is. So for most people, they don't really question what are these instruments and what are these things that are actually happening, because if you go back in time, these things were not in place. And so a lot of these things that we have now that are operating, especially as we sort of like work our way further into technocracy, digital IDs, central bank digital currencies, these types of things, those things are going to become a lot more relevant and important to understand. And perhaps we can talk more about that if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into that. I first realized kind of the structure and governance that we're under when I watched Zeitgeist. And I remember thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, we all need to become sovereign. But, because we exist in this world and society is all existing in it, it's kind of hard to break free. And people can't even imagine what that could look like, what the path is. So that's why I was really excited to have you on today, because you're kind of a pioneer in that from what I hear.
Yeah, kind of.
Cool. And we also mentioned a little bit about technocracy. What role do you think that plays in controlling our health and our freedom?
Well, I think before I get to that, it's probably better to just back up a few steps and to understand some sort of fundamental concepts, right? You mentioned like it's difficult to unplug from the system, right? Let's just say that, right? How do you exit the matrix, right? Yeah. It's really hard. Like, let's not sugarcoat things. It's very, very difficult because as time has moved forward, we've become more and more ingrained into the matrix, and we've become more tethered to the system. So the easiest example I can give you is, just look at money, right? So money was back in the day was gold or was silver, and then it became a banknote that was at least backed by some form of physical currency, or gold or silver or what have you, or even oil. And then as we move forward to today, it's really backed by nothing, right? So it's simply a number, if you will.
Backed by a debt system.
Right. Well, and that's a whole other conversation, but absolutely, right? And so that's just one example of how, now if you, just imagine if you had to say, okay, I'm done with all of the technology, right? And so you just threw your phone out and you decided that you were going to start paying with checks and with cash only. It sounds really good, but in reality, the system has now evolved to a point where it's very difficult for us to operate like that in that sort of system, right? So understanding that, and then understanding how we're being really funneled further and further into these systems, right? So take, for example, another one, which is, hey, we want biometric information, right? So instead of your passport now, the Canadian passport, the new issue passports, they have a little chip on them, right? I don't know if you've seen those, but that chip, if you understand what the chip is for, it says that it's to validate whether your passport is what's the status of your passport. And I'm like, well, why would I need to validate the status of my passport? Because it's right there. I have a passport and I have an expiry date on the passport. That's really all there should be. But once you understand what the intention is, it's to bake all of this biometric identification. Everything gets funneled into more of a technocratic system. So the digitization of everything, right? And once you understand that as a fundamental sort of path, it becomes a lot harder to just say, screw it, and I'm exiting the matrix, right? And I think that's where we find ourselves today, where a lot of people would like to do that, but it's really hard.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And it's like, where do you even begin? Because everybody's plugged into it. That's kind of the challenge I think most people are posed with. Just to touch on your point, I do, a lot of the younger generations, they've just been normalized to all of this, data sharing and stuff. What do you think that the risk is of having so much available to people in terms of being controlled? And
yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with data, right? So data is great. Data helps to inform better decisions. We can look at things in a different way with more data. We can get more granular. So I'm not opposed to data in and of itself. I think where we find ourselves now is like, how is that data being used, and what is that data being used for? And so again, coming back to technocracy, if you envision for a moment that, let me just put my climate change hat on, if we want to save the planet, we need to track and trace what everyone is doing, whether you are consuming too much meat, whether you are driving too much, whether you're traveling too much, what are your overall carbon emissions, these types of things. So now suddenly that raw data becomes a tool for one, monitoring and surveillance, and another one would be control. So again, with the digitization of everything, there's a concept of geofencing, right? So, can you imagine if they said, well, hang on a second, you've hit your meat quota for the day or for the week, and unfortunately you've driven too many kilometers, so your smart car is just not going to start now, or your bank card won't work if you leave your geographical area. So these are all like things that are sort of in the background, they haven't come to full fruition yet. But, I think that's part of it with the whole, the data. I think the other thing, if you look at what's going on in the US, just with, Palantir and AI surveillance and all these types of things, that's where you start getting into, hey, you know what, there's a lot of chaos in the world right now, and there really is. There's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of instability, there's a lot of polarization, radicalization, unhinged people, brink of civil war in different areas. So the more destabilization and chaos you have, you bring in order, right? So people are looking for order, they want order, and part of what that order looks like is going to be biodigital surveillance, right? So and how do we enforce that, in air quotes? We enforce it through digitization, right? So now we have data, and just have a look at what's happened this week. I mean, it's been a massive like turning point with what's happened this week, and already what people are saying is, hey, the U.S. government is saying, hey, we are going to anyone who has spoken badly about what's just happened, we're just not letting you into the U.S. And it's like, well, how would you know that, right? Oh, because we're going to track and trace everyone. We're going to monitor your social media feeds and so on and so forth. So, everything in life, so far as I've seen, everything has a dual purpose, right? So I think it's a very important point to understand. Data can be used for very, very good things. Data can be used for very bad things, right? Like technology can be used for wonderful things, right? I think technology is awesome, but then it can also be used for nefarious things as well. And so the way that these things are always sold to the public are always through the, benevolent, philanthropic, hey, this is going to help us all and be more convenient and safe and blah, blah, blah. And then when you flip the coin over, it's like, oh, holy shit, this is actually going to be used as a form of control or what have you.
Mm-hmm. It's like the road to hell was paved with good intentions.
100%. Yeah.
So I like that you mentioned that, because the matrix is actually something external that traps us, but it's also mixed with our own internal mindset that we've kind of been conditioned or programmed into accepting. And so that is what I think makes it so difficult for people, is the cognitive dissonance of it's almost like the Truman Show, you're like, this is my reality. And then you find out that it's all just a lie. Let's just touch on what the core pillars are of the matrix. It's health, politics, economics, technology.
Yeah, there's there's a lot to talk about there. I think that to sort of look at things from a more esoteric perspective, perhaps, like we're and there's many ways to view this, but if you perhaps entertain for a minute that we live in a construct. And the construct is essentially, the dreamer dreaming the dream. The matrix is also, from a more esoteric spiritual standpoint, it's what we make it, right? So the more that you, the beliefs that you have, the time
you're
that
feeding the system.
Yeah, you're essentially, you are creating your own reality, or at least you're a co-creator in that reality. And, you sort of come up against some very difficult philosophical questions with that, right? So it's like, well, okay, so if I just spiritually bypass things and ignore what's happening, does it make it go away? Well, no, it doesn't. But then how do I pay attention to what's happening and understand the world and make sense of it around me without helping to co-create the madness that's going on in the world at the same time? And I wish I had an answer for that, because I'm trying to figure that out for myself. But, I think that everything is currency, right? So you have a certain amount of time in the day. We all have the same 24 hours. And so everything is an investment, Okay, so you invest with your time, you invest with your energy, with your attention, with your money, with all these types of things. And
currencies.
yeah, and the more that so you have to choose wisely with what you invest in.
What you spend your money on, spend your time on.
Yeah, spend your time, your money, your energy. So, if we're fixated on doom and gloom all day long and how terrible everything is, and we're just glued to social media feeds and whatnot, then in a way we are feeding that. But I do understand that people are trying to understand the world around them. So I get that. So for me, that's a big part of the quote unquote matrix. I think there's that. And I think it's a bit of a tightrope walk, to be honest. From a more practical 3D kind of picture, we've got the matrix itself. Like, we're living in this illusion, and I mentioned some of them earlier. The illusion of democracy is one. So the way that we exist in the system is by itself an illusion, right? So again, when people think that they're all we're in this world and we exist in this world as free men and free women, in reality, the way that you actually exist in this world is a corporate legal fiction.
So what do you think the biggest illusion is that people are living under right now without realizing it?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, right? No, and it's good. Like, how much time do we have? I think there's many factors, right? So there's many different layers of what's happening, but I think that what people need to realize, there's so much to unpack with that, is that oftentimes what we're being shown is not reality. Right. So we live in a matrix, if you will, of organized crime. Okay, because I do believe that our governments around the world are criminals, and we have lots of evidence to prove that. And these are criminals that are masquerading as governments, right? And so
because Canada is actually a corporation more so than a country.
Right, exactly. And I've written long form articles on this, and I've dug pretty deep into it. So when you look at it like that, right? So we're living in this matrix of organized crime. We're living in a matrix of propaganda, and propaganda from all sides, right? So if you exist in this world and you spend any amount of time online, the first path to freedom, or the first ticket to freedom, is understanding that you yourself are being propagandized. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. You are being propagandized just by your very existence online. And once you come to that realization, then you can take a step back and sort of go, okay, hang on a second. I'm going to first have my human emotional reaction to anything that's presented to me. Then I have to put on my other hat, and I have to take a step back and distance myself and go, all right, what's really going on here? What are the intended outcomes? What would the motives be behind anything that's going on? Why would they put this out there? And so that's where, thinking critically.
Most people can't even wrap their heads around, because they're like, why would they fake this? Why would they spray the skies? Like,
yeah. And I get it, so it's very confusing. If you look at the government of Canada has this branch. Don't ask me why the branch exists, but it's called Horizons. Okay, so Horizons.
Branch or brunch?
A branch. I'll put my North American accent on and take my South African hat off. Yeah, so a branch of the government. I don't know exactly what they do. They're kind of like this think tank. They write these long documents called policy, right, or horizons, and so they actually wrote this document a couple of years back, and it's called Disruptions on the Horizon. People can look it up. And so this Disruptions on the Horizon basically says, hey, the world's going bananas right now. What's likely to happen, and what are the biggest impacts, right? So what's the most likely, and they rank it, and what would have the highest impact if it actually happened, right? And they rank all these different things. And one of the things that they have said that is happening the fastest, right, and will have a mid to high level impact, is that people will not be able to know what's real or not.
Yeah.
And the amount
you already can't with AI,
Yeah. So when I speak to people, especially people who just don't have the time to pay attention to all the stuff and read into it, and it's hard, like, to connect all these dots. The number one thing I hear from people is they literally say, like, it's like, I know something's up, and I know there's just weird, crazy stuff going on in the world, but I don't know what to believe. And so it should be no surprise that our own government has published a document 2 years ago that has said that this will happen. And then you have to wonder, if you think about how our media, mainstream media, is being captured, funded. As I said, our governments are, there's so much crime in Canada. It's unbelievable, actually, when you get
I know
into it.
people think we're like this safe little country, and it's like, actually.
Yeah, and so when you understand that, and then you think that, why is it that people don't know what's real? And that's a large part of that is mainstream media pumping out narratives, controlled narratives. You've then got the same thing happening on social media where we're being corralled into these echo chambers, right? So it's like whatever, if you're scrolling social media and you click on a picture of a cute dog, the algorithm says, oh my gosh, you really love dogs, and it's going to show you more dogs. Yeah. And if your partner,
or even if you're talking about something not on any social media, the ads will start popping up. And that's what's really starting to wake people up to, wow, like we're being programmed.
Yeah. Well, coming back to the algorithm, so you can literally have someone who lives in the same house as you, and if they're scrolling social media and they click like a picture of a cat, they're going to literally see cats all day long. You're going to see dogs all day long, and you will never see one or the other, right? So if you look at that and you then think about the news and the information that you're consuming, a big part of this matrix and the polarization of people is the fact that we're being fed algorithm-driven, curated information based on what we choose to consume. And that creates a very, very difficult situation, because what happens then is we don't actually have a shared reality. Right. So go back 200 years ago, and if you had a small village and everyone walked outside and you said, hey, the sky's blue, the dirt looks red, well, a tomato's a tomato, and we all share this reality, the shared reality that those people would experience would be 90, 95%, maybe even 100%, right? And there'll be small differences. Now, you take a look at the world, it's like that common ground, the shared reality that we experience is just vaporized, right? Yeah. To the point where you have, I'm not even going to get into it, but I think we can all agree on that, right? Yeah. And that creates a very difficult space to operate in and to live in.
Yeah, I used to work in advertising, and I actually left it because I had a moral dilemma every time I would create an ad, because I was creating problems that didn't exist and selling people stuff that they didn't need to solve problems that didn't exist, right? We're just feeding the beast, feeding the system of insecurities. And obviously I felt really misaligned with it. I wasn't aware of what I felt misaligned with at the time, but like I just trusted my intuition. But just over the years, as advertising increased, and now with the rise of the internet, back in the 1970s, it was around 500 to 700 ads. And then in the early 2000s, it was around 5,000. And now it's up to 10,000 ads per day. And these ads are all telling you what to do. And so people, who actually aren't aware of their subconscious, they're being triggered all of the time. And this also feeds this narrative of who they are. And I feel like this is why people are so disassociated today.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think when you extrapolate the same thing onto information, so what you're seeing in your feed, the people that you follow, the people that they follow, it's they've actually done studies on people who live in the same town, right? This was done in Colorado. And what they did was they took a bunch of people that were more left-wing oriented and they put them in a Facebook group. And then they took people who were more right-wing oriented and put them in a Facebook group. And what happened was both of those groups became radicalized, because it was all it took was the 2 or 3 people that had the most extreme views to start talking about them. And then other people were like, whoa, okay, like, hang on, that's kind of crazy. And so they actually, in that study, they found that those groups became more polarized and more radicalized just by being in 2 different Facebook groups, and take a look at how we are today. I make a point of actually trying to consume different types of media. So like I actually do pay attention to what mainstream media is saying. I just view it through a different lens, because I want to understand what the average person in the street who's still plugged into mainstream media and the news, I want to understand what they're being fed, to try and understand what they're thinking and where they're coming from. And then I also have to look at the more conspiratorial news side, and how much of that is accurate and how much of that is not.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just curious what, like for me, it was when I lived in Argentina, my roommate, he was very awake and he
Hmm.
sat me down and made me watch all these documentaries, and it was mind blowing, right? So that was
Yeah.
kind of my red pill moment. And from then it's been this journey. What was yours? What was the experience that shifted your understanding of sovereignty?
You know, I'll tell you this, like, I don't think I had one single experience. I'll just share a couple of sort of milestones, if you will. I didn't grow up in North America, so I'm from South Africa originally, and I grew up in the rise and fall of apartheid. So when I was a kid, it was like apartheid was alive and well there,
Hmm.
you know, which is a very crazy thing for people to try and wrap their head around. You know, whites only beaches
Yeah.
and curfew cards and all sorts of
Yeah.
stuff.
Wow.
But then as I got older, into my teenage years, that's when things started to shift. And by the time I left high school, that's when Nelson Mandela had taken place. So I share all of that because I watched the rise and fall of that. But then I've also looked in the rearview mirror as to what's happened in the wake of that, and realized that you know, I take a look at what's happening back home, and I have a lot of family members there, and there's a general level of mistrust of the government. We
Hmm.
all grew up like that, right? It's like we just, you know, everyone's just like, man, I don't trust these guys. Like these guys are a little sneaky. So that was a big thing for me, just growing up like that and sort of going, what's really going on here? But I think another pivotal moment was once I started getting into studying health. So you know, not necessarily functional medicine because that came a bit later, but just getting into the alternative health space. I started like paying attention to certain people. You know, I was friends with a guy by the name of Dr. Andrew Molden. Andrew Molden wrote a book on vaccinations that basically got him killed. I believe he was murdered at the age of 43. So
Great.
that
Now
was
that you said it, I'm going to get censored. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, so you know, so that, and then another person who sort of dropped off the radar a bit, and he's you know, done other things, and now he's sort of come back into the fold, is a guy by the name of Dr. Leonard Horowitz. And so reading some of his books, which are just like absolutely mind expanding, but also you just shake your head as you're reading it. You know, you got to read them a few times to really get them. But
Mhm.
he was writing these books back in the day, you know, and I say like quite a long time ago now, really laying out the origins of the, let's just call it, the pharmaceutical industry and these types of things. So I
Mhm.
think those were just a couple of things, not to belabor the point, but
Do you
those
remember the
were,
name of that book?
there's a couple actually. He's got one called AIDS, Ebola, and Emerging Viruses.
Okay.
And this was written long before there was any chatter of pandemics. I mean, this was
Mhm.
even before the original SARS, you know, way back in the day. And then he wrote another one, which was called DNA, Pirates of the Sacred Spiral. And so those ones are, you know, like obviously some of the information in there is now dated because we knew what we knew at the time. But I
Mhm.
think those were some of the things where it's just like, whoa, okay, hang on, what's really going on here? And then I just sort of went from there and you know, went down the rabbit holes.
Awesome. So for someone just waking up, because I want to kind of give a little guidance into how
Totally.
we can start to reclaim our sovereignty, what would be the first small steps to doing that? We'll start off with health and then just in life.
Yeah. I mean, you know, look, health is one of those things. Like I've been living a certain lifestyle for most of my life now. I would say well more than half my life. I'm coming up on 50 years old. I feel really good. I feel really healthy. I feel really grounded. But it didn't happen overnight. You know, it sort of was more habits and these types of things, right? So change is hard for people. So when we decide to make change, we need to think about our motivations. And if
Mhm.
we're motivated by fear because we're trying to move away from something, that type of change doesn't last, right? And I think so from a sovereignty perspective, if we're saying, hey, I want to run away from the bad man, or if I want to, you know, oh my gosh, I'm putting on more weight and I don't want to put on any more weight, I'm afraid of getting bigger. What you're doing is you're running away from things. And what will happen is as soon as that threat is gone, right, there's no drive for you to keep on living the way that you're living. So
Mhm.
if we're motivated by reward, that's a very different mindset, right? So reward-based motivation basically says, hey, I don't want to just lose the weight. I want to be the best possible version of myself, whatever that
Mhm.
is, right? And
Yeah.
that's an empowering type of motivation. It's a very different kind of drive, because even once you achieve your goal, whatever that goal is, you're driven to get even better. You're driven to go even further, right? There's no complacency in that sense.
I feel because, with the onset or I guess increase of all these pesticides and synthetic ingredients and just synthetic chemicals and stuff in our environment, people aren't even aware, because these aren't on the food labels. They're not really aware that they're even consuming them.
Yeah.
And to that point, people aren't even aware of how good they could feel. And so they just like tolerate it and they struggle. And then that perpetuates even more problems, because then they start medications or whatever with side effects.
Yeah.
And it's just really unfortunate, which is why I'm actually really big on conscious consumption.
Sure.
Conscious consumption. So what does food and nutrition play in the role of sovereignty on that journey of conscious
Yeah,
consumption?
it's I mean, let me put it this way, right? So to your point, I think that you know, just eating and living as naturally as you possibly can, right? Without agonizing over it, because I've spent a long time in the space. You know, I was the granola munching hippie with the Birkenstocks back in the day, 14 people in my graduating class. Now this field is just like the whole space is blown up, right? And I think what's come with that is a lot of people are hyper fixated on things too, right? So it's very easy with the amount of information that we have. It's easy to go, oh my gosh, everything's going to kill me, and then you're just paralyzed, right? So do what you can, make the changes that you can, but also make them, make a conscious effort to say, hey, this month, right? I used to teach nutrition and the environment for many years. It's like, this month I'm going to make a focused effort on cleaning up my cleaning products in my house, right? Next month it's like the cosmetics, or the bathroom. I'm going to tackle the bathroom, and we're changing out the toothpaste, and we're changing out the deodorant, and whatever it is. And if you do that for a year, you will see that you'll transform your whole life, right? Maybe even faster than a year. Relative to the sovereignty picture, and this is, again, it's a hard one depending on where you live, right? So I just happen to live out in the country. We have an okay sized property. I'm surrounded by farmers, and a lot of them are organic or regenerative farmers. But I think that trying to be more self-sufficient from the food standpoint is a good goal for people to have, because it does many different things, right? I'm under no illusion that you can be, there are people that are 100% self-sufficient, or at least 95%. I've met those people. It's very difficult to do that without funds, without land, without resources to be able to make that happen, right? Especially in Canada, which is a very northern climate. So like, but if you can at least strive for that or work towards that, what happens is, one, I get connected to my food again, right? Because I'm actually watching it grow, and I'm taking care of that food, and it's growing in the same environment that I'm in, and all these types of things, right? So you're connected to that. And then of course there's also the reward of, hey, I'm eating healthier foods that are more natural, that I grew myself. So like that. And then I think, connecting with other people who are doing the same thing, connecting with local farmers, that's been a huge thing for me. Like I actually don't really buy a lot, especially like meats and that sort of stuff, like eggs. I don't really buy much from the grocery store anymore. It's all coming from local farmers. Farmers markets here. We have a great farmers market. So I know a lot of the local farmers. We just support them, and what that does from a sovereignty perspective is not just like your own personal sovereignty, it's also your community sovereignty, which is very important. I think what people have done is they've kind of forgotten about that, and the farmers are struggling, so the more that we can support them, the stronger we are as a society.
Yeah, that's also part of the matrix. Like that's by design, because for these small independent farmers, I don't want to say they can't, but it's very expensive, and it's a huge process to be labeled organic. But most of the time, they are the ones that are organic, and it's just crazy, like the steps and stuff that they have to go through, and the difference between these large farms or large agricultural I don't even know if they're farms, but like plants and stuff that create food, and how, everybody complains about how real food is so expensive, but it's real. You know what I mean? Like, what are you eating if it's not organic? And people don't even really question that. But at least when you go to a farmer, like, you can talk to them, you can see how it's grown. And I'm an integrative nutrition chef, so I've always had that connection with my food. Everybody orders food and they get these people to pick it up. I hate that because they bring me the worst stuff. They bring me like hard avocados and like, I just can't even cook with it. So it's really important to do that and to put the energy into the food, or even if it's just like picking it and stuff. I mean, a lot of people don't talk about that.
And we're blessed here where the farmers, as you said, I think the red tape that's involved with getting these certifications and so on and so forth. Like, I know a ton of farmers that are just like, listen, man, I'm growing well beyond organic standards. I just don't want to pay the money and have the inspectors come around and be up in my stuff, like
exactly.
And so so it's great. Farmers market, a lot of people like that, which is good.
And I want to actually touch on this before we do. For somebody that, aside from just the food aspect of becoming sovereign, like, is there other ways people can leave the system? Become completely sovereign, as you mentioned.
That's something that I'm exploring right now. Okay, and there's a lot of different threads to pull on. It's very controversial as well. There's some things to understand first, right? So I think part of the misunderstanding with the whole, as I was saying before, how do we exist in the system, right? So we exist in our all caps, right? So if you just take a look at your birth certificate, at your driver's license, at your health card,
we survive alive, but we don't thrive.
Yeah, and it's like, but I think, like, on a more pragmatic level, like, what those are, the all caps letters, what they are is these are instruments that are used as collateral on the global debt market. Okay, so this is you have to understand that, and I did a lot of digging into this. I found my own, it's something called a CUSIP number, CUSIP. I forget what the whole long acronym stands for, but basically, in a nutshell, and I'll put this as simply as I can, like, there's something called human capital, right? So go and look at the United Nations, go and look at the World Economic Forum, all of these organizations, this has been long known, they talk about human capital. So what they say is, hey, when you're born, based on what's happening right now, we suspect that you will generate this much revenue in your life, that you will pay this much taxes, et cetera, based on averages, based on where you are, et cetera. And what they do is they borrow money against that, right? So they're using people as collateral. And I went and found my own social insurance number, my Canadian SIN number. I found the bond number. I found the inception date of the bond. I found the value of the bond. The expiry date of the bond, and so on and so forth. So it gets like super crazy when you get into it. And then Ontario has they wrap everything up into the bond market, and then they borrow money. So Ontario, I've discovered a couple of bonds where they basically have millions and millions of dollars, and these are payable back by 2030, as an example. So I not to belabor the point, but I think there's some things you have to understand there. Because once you understand these things and you sort of go, okay, like, I was born into the system without my consent, right? So your parents signed the birth certificates. They didn't know what they were doing. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. So you are just automatically entered into the system as a legal fiction, all caps. And there you go. And you spend your life like that. So how do you exit that?
Yeah.
That's really difficult, right? There's people out there that are much more seasoned than I am that have done some great work in these areas, where you might have heard about something called correcting your status. Okay, so people say, hey, you can correct your status. You can do what are called UCC filings. You can also write these sort of sovereignty letters where you simply state, hey, this is me. I exist as the natural man or woman. That's it. And I no longer exist like that. The problem with that is, and I'm not saying that it's inherently bad to do that. The problem with that is that if you don't understand the jurisdiction, if you don't understand how to language that and back that up, what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, hey, I'm exiting the system, just leave me alone. In reality, what that looks like is, and this is where I'm at, is like, how do you learn to stand there? How do you learn to defend yourself there? Because once you reclaim that status or correct your status, that's a whole different ballgame, because now you're not operating in the system as the corporate fiction. How do I drive my car?
Yeah.
What does my passport look like now, right? And that's where you come up against a hard place, right? Which goes back to what we were talking about before, was technocracy. So how do we exit that? It's a difficult thing to do. I haven't figured it out. I've made some headway, but I think that there's a much larger picture that's starting to unfold, and that picture is that more and more people are waking up to the fact that we are essentially living in some kind of slave system. Okay.
Yeah. That's exactly it. The slave system is the 3D. And the thing is, because we also co-create that, we are contributing to that. However, we can also shift our vibration. And this is where we talk about New Earth. It's something that we co-create collectively. It's not a place that we go to. It's a state of being. And this is the state of also sovereignty, because each chakra, this is Feed Your Chakras,
yeah,
it actually relates to freedom and to personal power. Like the root is for security, for our safety. And a lot of that is being imbalanced by the matrix in the system, which feeds our fears and our insecurities. We even have now technocracy, which is like another state of insecurity that we have to deal with, and people aren't even really conscious of because it's happening so fast. And then we have our sacral chakra, which is our emotions, which is what is being manipulated through ads and all these things, the fear that's being feeded. That's also a means of controlling us. The solar plexus is our personal power. And it's everything's disempowering us, but the heart space is what allows us to come into this sovereignty. It's where we can come into place from understanding and discernment through compassion. And then the sovereignty is our freedom of expression, our rights to speak. And the third eye is also being able to see through the illusions. And one way to really do that is, all these things are feeding our fears and stuff, but like the matrix is there to keep us stuck and small because we're easier to control. But if you tune into your emotions and you use your third eye, which is your real discernment, right? It's about navigating beyond the 3D, knowing if these things feel like they're invading you, if they feel like they're feeding the fear, and using that, because your higher self will never lead you down in that path.
Yeah. Well, and I'm all about just as a sidebar. I studied Ayurveda. So I used to do, when I had a lot more free time, I used to do a ton of yoga, like many hours a day, actually.
Nice.
Yeah. So I get the whole chakra thing. And I think, it's reclaiming our personal power from the solar plexus. But once you move that energy up into the heart space, it becomes the power of love. So doing things, comes back to what I was saying before. Are we motivated by fear or reward? And so it's like, we can look at it on the one hand and say, oh my gosh, look how these people, they've swindled us, they've enslaved us, all this sort of stuff. We have to acknowledge that. We have to look at it like that.
But also take accountability that you, in some part, are responsible for letting that happen.
To some degree. I mean, I think that there's another aspect to this, which is, people have been blinded from the truth, right? So we just don't know these things.
Well, most people are only vibrating on the lower 3 chakras, and it comes from the heart space. This is where it becomes the portal. Even just loving yourself enough to take those extra steps, to eat properly, to nourish your body, to say no to all of these distractions or things that are, attacking your psyche or lowering your vibration. That is the portal.
It is. And, coming back to this whole idea of exit the matrix, right? It's like, what do you want to create in the world? What do you want for yourself? And it's like, if you think of what's going on in the world right now and you say, okay, I have 3 children, right? I have 2 very young children, and I have a child that's a little bit older. And a lot of what I'm doing, it's like, I look at this and I go, what are we doing for the sake of my kids here, right? So what are we leaving for them? Because as we get further into this, it's getting harder and harder to do that, right? So there's a collective push now. There's a collective, especially in the circles that I'm in, there's a collective push to sort of say, well, hang on a second, right? I'm out. And what does that mean? Like, what does I'm out really mean, right? There's many different ways to look at that. One could say, hey, I'm going to legit exit the system. I'm going to be more self-sufficient. I'm going to grow my own food and blah, 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 blah. Like, that's not reality for a lot of people, right? So a lot of people don't actually want that. Like, yes, they want to be sovereign, but they don't actually want
You don't
that.
live on a farm with cows and
Yeah, I mean, which is nice and all, but it's also like, do I just not want to participate in society? Do I just want to be done altogether? There's no hard line there, you know. So for a lot of people, they don't really want that hard line to sort of say, okay, here we go. So I think as we push forward down this road and we navigate it, there needs to be some type of accountability, right? So if we're collectively going to reclaim our power, there needs to be some accountability on the other side, and there needs to be, you know, we need to call out what's happening. We need to see it for what it is, and then we need to collectively hold these people accountable and reclaim our power. And that is actually happening in the background. I won't get into all the details of that because it's a little bit like mind-boggling. But these types of things are happening, right? And so I think that you know, that's a big aspect of it, because some of the things that we're talking about now are so far beyond the average person's grip on reality that it sounds like it's like, oh my gosh, this is just never going to work, right? I've spoken to plenty of people in my circle. The sovereignty thing is just a complete write-off. Just don't even bother pursuing it because it doesn't work. And I'm like, but how do you know it doesn't work? Have we really tried that? No, we haven't.
Yeah. Well, freedom begins in the mind. So
right. And, you know,
once we become aware.
Yeah, but freedom also comes with a great deal of responsibility, you know, so you can't say, oh, freedom, freedom, freedom. And it's like, I still want to just exist in the system and pay my taxes and fund the criminals and do all this stuff, but I just want to be free, because that's a very egoistic, selfish way of freedom, right? Because it's like, so long as I'm okay, who cares about the rest? And that's not freedom. Freedom comes with responsibility.
But that's also freedom operating from the solar plexus, where it's all, yeah.
But like, when I say responsibility, it's like, I want people to really think, like, if you talk about sovereignty and you talk about freedom, like, do you have the wherewithal? Do you have the understanding of the responsibility that comes with that? Right? I'm not going to sit here and proclaim that I have it all figured out. I don't, right? But that's the mindset and the premise that I'm operating from, because there's something much bigger than us here that we're actually tapping into. And I think that there's actually a real chance here, right? As the dark gets darker, the light gets lighter. And I think that there's a real chance here for us to actually transform humanity and break free of the slave system, to tell you the truth.
Let's go.
Right. Hey, it sounds all cool, but in reality, you know, you got to know where you stand. You got to understand some of these things so that when the heat comes, you know what ground you're standing on, right?
Yeah, beautiful.
And that's the hard part.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we're running out of time. So, Brett, thank you so much for bringing such clarity, courage, and conviction to this conversation. And from global advocacy to serving the local community, your journey is a power that's sovereignty begins within and ripples outward into everything that we do. And so to everyone also for tuning in, thank you for joining this conversation. If it stirred something within your soul, I invite you to connect with Brett through his Onward podcast and the work that he shares there. You'll find the link in the description. And if this episode nourished you, please like, share, and subscribe, and follow me, the Chakra Goddess, for more conscious conversations and radiant tools to feed your chakras. Until next time, stand in your truth, reclaim your sovereignty, and remember that freedom is your birthright.